that's the hardest part, I think, is trusting that if you make decisions for your child's well-being, that you, as the parent, can live with what society might say or think about those decisions, but recognizing that society isn't your family, and that, I guess the main message too is it's going to be okay.
Welcome everyone, this is Ekaterina with Trust Me Mom. Today I'd like to welcome to my show Todd Sheldon. Todd is a passionate parent who raised a wonderful daughter who has Asperger's, and today we would like to hear the story of his family. Todd, welcome.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually first heard about this platform online through LinkedIn, and I was immediately interested because it seemed like you had interviewed several experts in the fields of parenting, different types of children, that have different conditions or have gone through different situations. And as parents, it's sort of a semi-universal condition where we're all trying to do our best, and there's not a handbook, and we're trying to figure out, what works for you or what works for you. And so it just seemed really interesting. And so then that made me think of my passion, right, which is sort of in the special needs area of kids, and so how to best let them grow to their fullest extent, knowing that society makes it hard sometimes to do that. I have personal experience. Our daughter Kelly is a girl that was diagnosed with Asperger's when she was 11. And what's really funny about that is that meant there were 11 years where we didn't know as parents that she had high functioning autism. And you may ask yourself, like, how did you not know for 11 years that but we did. I mean, we saw behavioral differences in between, what she was doing, what her friends are doing and stuff. But like, you can always rationalize it as, she's a little different, and when I say different, what I mean is, when she was very young, in fact, like born, they said in the hospital, they were like, wow, her hearing, she has super hearing. She like rates off the charts in hearing. We were like, oh, well, that's interesting. Well, come to find out later, that's one of the signs of autism, right? A super sensitivity to different, senses. Then she didn't make friends easily. She was super nice kid, but like all the other gaggles of kids would run around, and she was sort of a one-off, and then also, but in a weird way, like seemingly didn't care. She was kind of in her own world. She was reading very, very early, even as chapter books ages like 2 and 3. It's kind of crazy. And then she was not as sensitive to cold, like when we'd visit relatives in Wisconsin and different places where it was really, really cold in the winter. And she would just be comfortable. She would say, like, I don't need a jacket. I don't need whatever. She just wasn't cold sensitive the same way. And she always liked to be barefoot, and she liked really soft clothes. She didn't want anything off her shoulders. All these things, we kind of knew, but it wasn't framed in a way of like Asperger's, which I guess I don't know for the audience. Asperger's is when there's like a social anxiety or a different, I'm not an expert in Asperger's, but it's a behavioral sort of a condition where the kids don't pick up, or adults don't pick up like micro facial expressions, and they're not tracking socially with everybody. Often they hang out with people a little bit younger than them. But sometimes they have really exceptional abilities academically or mentally, like they can focus for long periods of time. They can change the world a lot of times because like they think about things deeper than a lot of people do. So it's an interesting dichotomy of having like super strong academic stuff and then, like, I'll say behind, that's a term I don't like, socially. So we found out because we found out Kelly had Asperger's because my aunt, who's a nurse, came to visit my sister one time when Kelly was 11. And she said, well, she actually wrote an email after she left the trip, and she said, so how are Todd and his wife managing Kelly's Asperger's? and I read the email and I said, her what? Like, I didn't even know the term, and so that immediately sent me into a research mode where I looked up Asperger's. I looked up, one of the key things was on YouTube videos. I was, oh my gosh, this is Kelly's behavior. Like, I'm seeing that, like, there's a certain eye type, there's a certain body language, like spatial relationships are harder, there's all this stuff, but the kids are fine, but they're also different. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so then what that did is that helped us as parents be super, super patient with her. Whereas before we might have seen certain behaviors as defiant or just not paying attention or whatever. All of a sudden we realized, like, oh, this is somebody who's thinks differently, like straight up thinks differently. Her brain works differently. And I'm like, oh, okay. So let's figure out how to talk to this person in a way that helps her get what she wants in life and kind of also helps us coach her to succeed in what she wants.
Todd, can you tell me more about what changes you had to make for your family in order to accommodate Kelly?
Yes, thanks for asking. There were, every family has to adjust to a special needs child, right? And so in our case, I actually asked Kelly, we took a trip to the zoo and we were walking around and I asked her, how is she doing? How's life? And at this time we were living in the suburbs. And she said, I said, if you could live anywhere, where would you want to live? And I was just creating a conversation. And she said, the country. And I said, the country. I said, that's interesting. What does that mean? And she's like, well, she loves animals. And she's like, I'd like to have a horse or I'd like to have space, and then, that was interesting because that was what my wife wanted also, just in life. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So now we have wife and daughter both wanting country. And then I talked with the psychologist we took Kel to, and I said, okay, this is a weird question, but do people do this? Like, does it make sense for us to leave the suburbs, assuming, my job could do it or whatever? Like, does it make sense to do that? And the psychologist said, that's a great idea. She said, right now, Kelly's trying to filter through a lot of billboards and roofs. Like when you travel down the highway in the suburbs, all you see, I call it a sea of roofs, like, and sirens and all these things. And she said, that's a great idea. So we started this epic transition of trying to find a property close enough to the city that I could work, but that was far enough away that it was sort of a small town life, and quieter and slower that way. And it took us some time actually, but we did find a place and we did the thing where we sold our house in the suburbs and kind of moved to a little house on a prairie out here. And it's been really wonderful because that accommodation has not just helped Kelly have a clearer mind and be able to grow up in a different way, but it's allowed our entire family to create a new lifestyle that we didn't know before, as far as being in touch with the natural world. Like it's, on the one hand, it's really quiet around here, and on the other hand, it's really loud. Like my joke is that when we first moved out here for the first year, I couldn't believe how quiet it was. I was so used to motor noise and things. And then what's funny is my brain clicked into the natural sounds of the birds and the animals. And what's funny is I took that same walk a year later and I was going, oh my gosh, it's so loud around here. Like there's so much. It's funny, your brain changes. And so with the kids, and we have a son as well that moved with us, and they both have met entirely new people. They've done things they would have never experienced. So that part of it has been really good. So what I'll find, I guess my point with accommodations is, it might seem like it's hard or it is a short-term burden because you almost have to do a part-time job on top of your life to try to figure out how to do the thing. But the benefits are in my experience, like exponential. You're at the very least, you're caring about your kid. You're showing them that they matter, that what they, want matters to you. And so that's huge if they feel like you're in their corner. But then also you're growing as a family. You're taking on a new adventure. There's a lot of positives that come out of it, not just the mental health benefits, right? And then, it's just fun. I mean, like you look at it like, hey, we're doing this, and so it puts you out of your comfort zone. But anyway, so yeah, that was a really good question. And then other accommodations we only bought her soft clothing, right? We would go to the thrift stores, because the t-shirts were a little older and like they were softer and she didn't like the scratchy. And we kind of let her be barefoot as much as she wanted to be, right? Unless you're going into a store or something. I mean, she was comfortable there. My theory was that she'll be a great adult if we can just get her there. Like growing up is hard. I mean, we made these changes at the junior high age, 6th grade, at 7th grade. That's a hard time of life for everybody. And to be doing it with special needs, and most people, I would say, are aware of the part where they're different. And so they're trying to fit in. They want to fit in. They want friends. But it's just, they're trying to bridge and they're trying to learn themselves. And so, so along with that, we made this huge decision to, the other accommodation was to take her out of public school. And that was an adventure, transitioning. We had to kind of, and this is another thing that I say, right? We had to suspend societal expectation. As parents, we're raised in society. Times change. Homeschooling doesn't have the stigma now that it did even a generation ago. But it's still different. And, within everybody's state they live in or country they live in, they kind of need to look at what needs to be done lawfully, I would say. Like, I read the Texas Constitution to figure out we live in Texas. Otherwise it would have made no sense at all. But yeah, I had to read the Texas Constitution to figure out, like, what do they want in terms of academics? Like, what qualifies as a homeschooling situation and stuff. And Texas actually has a lot of latitude where, as long as you're teaching reading, writing, math, and citizenship or civics, it qualifies, and so we were doing that as a matter of course anyway, and I was like, okay, well, this is great. So we have sort of carte blanche to, like, let this kid grow. And I taught for 2 years too in public schools in junior high. And, there's a phrase that everybody uses, which is try to meet the child where they are, right? Academically. And don't try to pin a one size fits all solution. And so when you homeschool, you can do that. Like, we had the ability to, like, try different curriculums and find different avenues, like what works for her, what doesn't work for her. We found out she likes books way more than screens to read. So we set up a situation where she was reading through books, learning through books. And this is not to say it was easy. Okay. I remember nights sitting on the bed with books all scattered all over the bed, and me just late at night, and I've worked all day, and trying to find something so this person can like learn. And we tried different things and they didn't work. My wife tried to teach her, and that was harder. And then so they asked me to do it, and then that was on top of everything else. And so we, long story short, we worked out a way. And this is, I guess, the advice I would give is that find what works for you with your child and do that. And don't worry about the noise. Like, don't worry about, one of Kelly's great lines, which my wife and I say all the time, is people might notice, but they don't care.
That's right.
And I've taken so much from that phrase. And sometimes people have opinions, especially when they're younger. As you get older, sometimes they're doing their own thing. But yeah, they might notice that you're doing something differently. But honestly, they're really into themselves. Like they kind of don't care what you're doing, like in a way. And so, do what works for you, and then I really believe that just listening to the kids and having them kind of guide you. I joke that I've learned more from Kel than she learned from me through the years. And also, my wife and I are a pretty good team, as far as she was really, really good with them when they were super, super young. And just, we both try to model good behavior, as, consciously, but it's also because we're not perfect. And so then when you slip up or you get angry too quick or you do anything, I've found that if you just apologize to the kid, or you probably, he's like, hey, that's my bad, like that's me, and so, you just let the child know that you're human too, and you're doing the best you can, and you're in their corner, and how can you move forward together? And I can honestly say that we're so close now. Like, she's in a different place. Well, do you mind if I bridge the time from 12
Absolutely. Tell us where she's now. Yes.
So yeah, I guess I don't leave you hanging. So we took her out of public school in 6th grade. We went through this transition. What we found was she did not like to do school work or academic stuff at home. She said that she wanted home to be sort of peaceful, and she wanted a special place, right? So there's a library nearby. So I would book time with her and regularly go to the library and I did find a book that was a GED, high school equivalency program. It's a series of 4 tests that they need to pass, and then you can get your equivalency. It's kind of like a high school diploma, but different. And then you can get into college with that if you want to, if that child wants to go to college. And so that's kind of what we did. Like, I would take her, and Kel, she wanted to, this is the other thing too, she didn't want help. Which that might seem like it could be good and bad, but she just was very independent, and she wanted to take it on and learn things. And so I would sit at one table and I would bring my computer and do some work stuff, and she would sit at another table, and she didn't want to sit too near me, that whole thing. And so, she would study, and she would let me know when she was ready for the book that we found was online, and it had the practice tests and answers, so you could kind of check yourself and stuff. So she would let me know, okay, I think I'm ready for this test. I think I'm ready. And so, like, she took that one and then she passed it. And then she's like, it's just those little milestones along the way, frankly, which aren't so little, where you gain traction with your beliefs that you're on the right track for that kid, and so, long story short, she did pass all 4 tests, and she was able to take that certification into junior college, where we did this thing where we soft launched her. She was older, and she wanted to kind of go to college and be her own person. But we didn't love the part of sending this child who's not maybe ready for the full wave of the real world, to be on her own. And so we did what we call a soft launch. So she went and lived with my sister in the suburbs, near the junior college. And we call my sister Saint Kim, because, like, Kim took on the difficult transitioning from, like, teenager to 20 or whatever. And she did that wonderfully, and then she actually did so well in junior college, she was able to get a scholarship into the honors program at University of North Texas, where she is a junior now. And she's doing great. She's an English major with a music minor. Along the way, Kelly took up the guitar and the piano, and she's always been very musical. And so it's one of those, I'm leaving out a little bit, where all, like, the hard part. Let's talk the hard part. the hard,
Exactly. That was my next question to
yeah.
tell us more about the sacrifice you made, and
Hmm.
there were tough moments and how you overcame them and how did you handle them.
Sure. So part of the tricky part about raising a special needs kid is when you make choices, you're wondering if you're like hobbling your child or for their future. Um, when we moved out here, we didn't know anybody, and Kelly wasn't. She was socially anxious, and so there were weeks, like I can't explain. Like there were weeks where she didn't really leave our couch very much. Like my wife had the brilliant idea of trying to talk her into um, community theater, like trying to see if she could do, because we knew that to get up and speak in front of people would not be good for her, or we thought it wouldn't. But then, so my wife positioned it as like, well, Kelly, you like to paint. I mean, like, what if you worked on the set? What if you just painted the background? Like, just go in and whatever. And luckily, we were in kind of a small enough town where they were always needing people. And so Kelly went in there theoretically to help maybe get a job painting the sets. And it turned into the director saying, well, we need another background person in this next play. Would you read a couple of lines and kind of Kelly overcame herself and did that. And that led to a few community theater plays she did. And that led to her first real friends, and her, but up until she was, I mean, 15 or 16 years old, like she didn't have friends, and in the traditional way. We have a big family, so she had a lot of cousins, but that was such a huge thing for her to have friends. Um, and then also for the friends to have her. Like what we found was there are so many parents and children in this book where the kids think differently. And everybody just wants to have friends and stuff. So it worked out amazingly well. But again, that was an unknown. The hard part is what's between your ears, I think, and what your fears are as a parent. Um, and it would be very interesting at some point to have Kelly on to explain her
Yes.
side of this entire
Mm-hmm.
thing. But yeah, we as parents, that's the hardest part is to question, am I doing the right thing? I'm burning years here with this theory of homeschooling, and when there isn't a lot of traction, or when you don't see outwardly the progress, it's hard. And so I would just try to find the little victories, right? The little advances where, maybe she asked to go do something, or maybe, in Asperger's, just the idea that she was actively working to improve herself. Like she had her own, at the time it was an iPad, and she would look up stuff that she was interested in and that I would have never known. You know what I mean? Like trying to teach herself Japanese, or just different aspects. And so but yeah, that's the hardest part, I think, is trusting that if you make decisions for your child's well-being, that you as the parent can live with what society might say or think about those decisions, but recognizing that society isn't your family, and that it's gonna, I guess the main message too is it's gonna be okay. Like I've really felt, like we've talked to a lot of parents through the years, with a lot of different types of kids, and it's gonna be okay. Every path is different. Kelly, she started, air quote, driving late. Like she didn't drive till she was 20. She didn't attempt, she didn't graduate in this traditional way from her high school. She didn't do these things, but like, all right, okay, so what, like I've eliminated the terms behind, should, like there are certain words I don't use anymore, because there isn't, in my opinion, there's no behind, there's no should, right? It's sort of like, okay, don't put that extra pressure on yourself or feeling bad about yourself because you're taking a different road. Like that might be the perfect road for you guys, and so that's what I've learned is I have more grace with myself, but then also with any parent raising a special needs child. I would say that if you don't have a special needs child, you might not understand all of that. You kind of do objectively, like, well, that's harder, but there's a whole other level of exhaustion and stress that comes along with it.
Definitely, absolutely. So how did you and your wife, I don't want to say survive, because it's been a very educational and often rewarding process for you guys, but it probably also took a hit on your marriage, or you did mention that you were supportive, but at the same time, it's more challenging than a so-called typical family, right? So how did you navigate those challenges as a couple?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We, like most couples, we have different backgrounds, growing up. She came from a family of 7 kids, and it was just me and my sister. So we've always had a very supportive group of people, regardless of it. I guess I'll say part of it is we didn't feel like we were in it alone. I felt like our extended family has done so much to help with Kelly and with our marriage too. I mean, just the part where you can talk to people. There is a lot of stress when if one person's working or both people are working, you've got your work stuff to care for. And then after that, when you're already kind of tired, you come and then this one or more children are home needing you, and then, sometimes the marriage priorities get pushed back because there are these other urgent things. And so what we did is, we actually built in so I had a daddy-daughter night, once a week. And then the next week we had a date night. We had a deliberate attempt to make sure we had time with each other outside of the family, to where we could just go and talk, even if it was just for an hour or whatever, to just sit there and say, like, how are you? Like, what's going on? And so that was massive for us. And we did that for years. And so, and I put it on the calendar and held it sacred, just like any other big event. And so you gotta, I think, to have a dedicated time with the child, with you, dedicated time with the child, with your spouse, so that they can have a relationship, you can have a relationship with them, and then dedicated time for your spouse and you, so that, or partner, so that you can say, okay, this is us now. Like, let's put our responsibilities to the side and let's just talk about us, as far as, where are you in life, and like, what's going on? What are you dealing with? And so we did that. And I don't say we're perfect at it, but like it allowed for a dedicated time to grow, the marriage, even in the midst of the other things. And I think she would agree. We feel closer now than we did, even when we moved out here. Like, it wasn't a bad situation before, but like, we've had to rely on each other a lot more, since this move. And, it's been like, I'd say we're closer now than we've ever been, but it was deliberate. It won't just, my opinion is, it won't just happen if you're living your life and you hope to, like, oh, I'll see him today because we're kind of in the same house. But like, that isn't, one of the other reasons we moved out here was because I came home from work one day and we had 4 people on 4 different screens in 4 different rooms. I was, in the living room, and I looked and I was like, where is her? Do the quick, like, where is everybody? And, I was, Chris, my wife and I, we talked and we were like, we don't want that. Like, we don't want 4 like screens in 4 rooms where everyone's not sharing. And so part of the Little House on the Prairie theory was we downsized and only got one TV, and then there are devices and things, but we wanted everybody to be outside more instead of inside, and together more than they were. Okay, and so that was conscious. And what happened was we got to negotiate for TV. What do you want to watch? What do you want to watch? And so then we'd kind of, well, let's watch yours today. We can watch yours next time. We would have family movie nights where we would agree on the movie, and do that. And everybody got a different pick sometimes, and then we would have, like, the devices were part of things, but I think it was less than if everybody was just in their own room. and everybody did get outside more. Like there was the part where, because you're out in the country, there isn't like the suburb green space half a mile or a mile away where, you might go there, but you probably won't. And so we were able to kind of just go outside and have them have that space. And so anyway, it was very deliberate, I would say, and consistent, but fun. Like it wasn't a chore.
That's so good. It does sound very romantic and fun. The way you described living out in the country, it sounds fun. Did you guys get the animals?
We got yes, well, to a degree. We got we ended up with some barn cats, right? So we had a few cats. At one point we had a lot of cats, but they're mostly gone now. And then we got a couple of dogs and a couple of horses. So horses were the big ones that, it turns out, which I didn't know this. I'd always heard horses were just super expensive and, all these things. And so that's probably true in a suburb world where maybe you have to board them somewhere and then there's all this. In the country, in our world, they have enough grass and we have like a little pond. And they're pretty self-sufficient. And so we actually ended up getting 2 horses that needed a good home. This is the other thing. In the country, your neighbors are aware of what you're doing because there's nothing else to look at. And so they noticed that we didn't have animals. And so they were like, y'all need some animals. And so we kind of put the word out that if there was a good deal on horses, let us know. And we got a great deal on horses. A nice set of 2 horses who were older and well-trained. Their owner had passed away. And they were just the family was just looking for, if you could take them together, they would just give you these horses and let them have a good life. And so we've ended up with 2 horses, and the one actually passed away last year, but we still have the other one. He's 29 years old. And but yeah, so to answer your question, we did get the animals. My wife did get a horse. The kids, they grew up completely differently than they would have in the suburbs. And it's not all great. I mean, there is nature. Nature happens. Kelly actually did. Kelly came up to me after being out here for years. She said, "Dad, nature's merciless." I said, "Yeah, nature is merciless." I mean, you get to see, some of the food chain in play in nature, and so that doesn't sit well with everybody. But the fact of living where there are fewer external distractions, right? Like for me to hear a siren's super rare, and in fact, if you hear a siren, you're actually concerned because you probably know the person.
Right.
But yeah, I think for Kelly, to your point earlier about accommodations, I like that word, but we didn't think of it that way, if you know what I'm saying. Like we were just rerouting, to use the GPS term, we were just rerouting as we needed to meet the most immediate need and to grow the future, right? And so, I think it's a really important detail that you just keep in communication all the time. I mean, just you never know what that kid's going through, and they're probably not going to tell you everything, because if you remember being a kid, you probably didn't tell your parents everything. And so they are dealing with things that, if you can just let them know you're there for them, and just be a proponent for what they're trying to do. What are the resources out there for people with Asperger's, or how do you raise an Asperger's child, and so I looked for books, interviews, and there's a book that I read called You Can't Make Me, But I Can Be Persuaded. And so I will say this, I've always said this about Kelly, and she gets it from me probably, but she's a strong-willed child. And strong-willed child, means that they aren't just going to go along with what you say. They're, sometimes unreasonable just to hold their own, and stuff. And so you have to figure out, even just special needs or not, you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to get this child to do what it is, whatever it is, right? And then the other thing I did, and I found some nuggets in there, right, which was nice. And then I read on Temple Grandin, which I don't know if you've heard of her. She is she's autistic, and she is animal sciences expert.
Yes, I saw a book about her. Didn't she work with animals and
Yes,
designed
yes, she
as
designed the buildings and the facilities and things.
yes, and it was something about the hug.
Yes, I'm
Uh,
trying to remember. It's been years now since I read it. But yes, there's like, so what I learned when reading that, and I watched some of her interviews, is that having autism isn't a limiter, right? In many ways, it could be an enabler if people are brought up to realize they have all this strength. And it was an amazing example to me of someone that had reached the top of her field um, with autism. Like despite autism or however you want to say it, and so it was eye opening that this was right at the beginning of all this, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, and so um, anyway, and then the other thing we did, which was a big step, was telling Kelly that she had Asperger's. Right? That's an interesting conversation because you want to frame things in a way where it's holistic. You're you, but we've discovered this thinking pattern you have, and that's what I would call it. It's how you think. It's not people say it's like, I don't want it to be a negative, like, oh, you've got this thing. It's like, okay, so here's you. And so here, you've got these things that we're dealing with. And so you're going to, let's figure out a way to make them work for you or to minimize how they might work against you. And just, kind of frame it in a long-term holistic way. And I think once we had that conversation, Kelly went and did her own research. It was almost liberating for her, I believe, to be able to go on the internet, look up Asperger's, confirm that, oh, wow, that, check, check, check. I mean, you go through the list. She sees the same videos. She's like, gotcha. And so it became like, whoa. And so then she was able to frame her thinking. She's like, I'm not a weirdo. Like, this is me, right? Like, I always thought like I'm the only one that's dealing with this. And
right.
you realize, no, you're not, in fact. So then we did all the stuff. We went to support groups. We did Asperger support groups, but just for a short term. But that was really interesting too, because part of the group were parents of Asperger's kids, and then part of the group were Asperger's adults. And so you learn like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. Like, what works for you guys? Like, what did you get into? Like, what sports or what activities, what music? Like, how did you navigate this phase? And so that was really cool to meet people. And so yeah, and then we did medication for a second. That was the other thing we tried. Because
what kind of medication is prescribed for Asperger's?
They prescribe Vyvanse is the name of it, which is like a stimulant. It's supposed to be calming, and what we found was we only did that. We did that for a little while, a few months, and what we found was Kelly said, okay, as the parent, we noticed a difference. We noticed Kelly was more reasonable, I would say. Not that she was wildly unreasonable in general, but just kind of getting out of bed, going to the day, it was a challenge sometimes. And so what we found was on the Vyvanse, she was more, like, okay, and like would do that. And then, but not overpoweringly, and then she said she didn't like being on it. She didn't like the way it made her feel, and she didn't notice that big of a difference in her own thinking or whatever. And so we looked at it and just holistically also, we didn't really want her to be on medication if she didn't need to be. So we just decided to not do that. We decided to discontinue that because it wasn't so, the margin wasn't so different that we were like, oh, this is totally different, And so, but I will say Kelly, she works on herself. I mean, and everybody's different. I have to give a ton of credit to Kelly. Like, we tried to model good stuff, but I mean, it's really her, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's their life. It's not my life. And they've got to figure out what they're going to do, who they're, and, as parents, if we can support that process to help them, I've told Kelly her gift was her gift from us was having the latitude to master herself. Because so many of us as adults, even neurotypical, we railroad ourselves into a life. You know, you grow up, you might go to certain schools because those are the schools you go to, and you might go to, you know, it might be like in this example, like high school, college, job. So now you're 22 or 23 in a job and you don't know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that for her. I wanted her to have the time to learn who she was, learn her triggers, learn her action triggers, like what spurs her, what excites her, you know, learn those nuances of how you think and respond, and then take action on them and grow them without societal pressure of high school, you know, noise, you know.
Yes.
And so I would say taking her out of school was a huge plus for us, just allowing, I say out of school, out of public school. And then, but yeah, so she took it on and she did that. And you know what's amazing? I'll say what's amazing is she came back, 2 years ago. She's 24 now. She came back 2 years ago. We were on a lunch or something, and she said, I just want to thank you for letting me do that. She said, like, who does that? Who comes back and thanks their parents? You know, at 20, but like she did. And she said, you know, thank you for letting me have that time, you know, because it's made all the difference. Like now she's not just reacting to something in life. She's choosing, and she's recognized her strengths and things she needs to work on. And she's always working on something, you know, I mean, as far as within herself and trying to get better, you know? So I just feel like, again, all these were complete unknowns. I mean, dartboard, geez, I wonder if this is going to work, you know, and some things worked and some things didn't. The curriculums largely failed until we found this idea of the GED program. Mm-hmm. and even just the term is unschooling, which is a weird term, but it's the idea of letting the child find what they're interested in. It's a little bit like Montessori in a way, but like just the idea that let them figure out who they are and give them the latitude to do that. One of my wife's brilliant phrases was, let her get bored. You know, she says kids these days aren't allowed to get bored. Yes. They're not forced to think creatively. They're given distractions their entire life, every day. 24-hour cartoons if you want it. And you never have to think. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we wanted to avoid. And so my wife's thing was let her get bored, you know, because then they'll pick up a stick or they'll figure out or they'll draw something. You know, it's that part where you're like, oh, this is awesome. Like, and this is, by the way, me telling me the same thing. Yeah. Because I'm as guilty as anybody else. But like just the idea that when you let your brain, when you actually are thinking about things, life is wonderful. You come up with some stuff that you know, so that really makes you happy. And so I feel like she came back later and said, thank you for letting me do that. And, you know, just, I had that dad tear, you know, and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, like, you know, who says that, you know? And so any other questions?
How did your son, what was his experience growing up in your family? And did he also have any differences? Mm-hmm. Because the whole focus was on Kelly, this whole story. But what about your son? How did he feel in this environment?
Yeah, so our son's, his name is Doug, and he is an outstanding human being that he went with it. I give him large credit because this is just a parent talking. I mean, he's brilliant in his own right. Okay, you know, like he's just done well in life so far. But what made him different was his support of Kelly growing up, and then his support of just being able to master himself as well. He does, I would say he has a touch of, I'll say this, frame it this way. We all have a touch of autism. That's why they call it a spectrum. Like we are all on the spectrum to some degree in some ways, right? And so I will say what Doug has is an ability to think deeply about things and to focus really well. But what really makes him special is he is a massive supporter. Like we had this talk when we got Kelly's assessment done when she was like 11 or 12. Um, Doug and I had this talk. We walked down, this is in the suburbs, and we walked down the median of this road. And I said, look, Doug, he's 2 years older. I said, look, your big brother. I said, she idolizes you, and you've got a tremendous amount of power, with her in that relationship. And I said, this is your chance to really do good. Like you can support her. I said, she doesn't always understand what's going on socially. You can include her in things. You can, just be that person that, her big brother. He took it on. I mean, like he really did. And not just with Kelly growing up, but like he was that person in high school too. Now I always say we had one in-system kid and one out-of-system kid. Doug was the in-system kid. So like he was, the traditional public school, then played sports and then went to college and he's working now in the Dallas area. But he's got that brain. He got an engineering degree, from A&M, and so he's got that brain. But then what makes him special is the person he is. Like we had people when he came back to his high school for homecoming of the next year. We had kids coming up to us as the parents. These kids that were sort of outcasts in high school, they were coming up saying, Doug's my best friend. Like Doug, and I'm like tearing up. It was so impactful. And I was like, Doug, who is this? And we're talking and he would just say, oh yeah, he was in one of my classes and no one would talk to him. And I just listened, and he told me, he said, everybody just wants to be validated.
Yes, for sure.
Krista and I were both like, whoa. I mean, and that tells you a lot about Doug,
Yeah.
he's that person. And so just like getting emotional.
Well, it sounds like you have a wonderful family and very supportive.
Yeah, we're lucky. But I'll say this, it's never done in a sense, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean, we've gone so I call active parenting from birth to probably when they can drive, whenever that moment is, okay? Because you've got to be in their lives a lot, and they're, but once they start driving, whatever that age is, once they start driving, they're largely independent, right? And then we move into what I call like guided parenting. You're not the one that's got their primary focus, right? They're way more into friends or activities or whatever. But they'll still come to you with questions about things, if that channel's open. And so, so right now, Kelly's still Kelly. Like she's doing great, but she'll still ask some questions. And now her questions are whoppers, as far as they're like these big macro questions because she's been thinking about things. And so that's fun. So we have these deeper conversations now. And then Doug is on his own. And, so yeah, we did the soft launch with Kel, with my sister, and then now she's living on her own in college.
Well, that's such a wonderful story. I think it's an inspiration for the audience to see that your hard work and patience paid off. It's still a process, obviously, but you see the results and how your children appreciate everything you've done for them and how you found contentment in this situation and learned to appreciate the good things. So thank you so much.
You bet. No, thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we've had extended family who's been supportive throughout. My aunts and uncles, my parents, my wife's parents, everybody just has been so good. We're a pretty harmonious group. And it's always been nice if there was getting overwhelmed or whatever, we were able to kind of say, hey, could you come help, or do whatever, asking for help is not a negative. It's how we all get through stuff. And if we help each other, then it'll all get better. And so that's what, I really think that's the important part, is to just support, each other. So.
That's right. Well, thank you, Todd. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. This is wonderful.